You've entered Void of Rules, where chaos reigns and darkness consumes all. In this twisted realm where all laws have crumbled, only one rule remains, and those who break it are cast into eternal digital oblivion. The rule is simple. Subscribe. We're almost at 3,000 corrupted souls, but the Void hungers for more. Our goal is 10,000 subscribers before this year bleeds into darkness. Will you join our legion, or face the consequences of defying the Void? Now let's jump into today's story. Blood tastes like copper pennies and regret. I know this because I've had both in my mouth more times than I care to count. And tonight, driving through the serpentine mountain roads of northern Slovenia, the metallic tang coats my tongue like a second skin. The windshield wipers can't keep up with the rain hammering against the glass, each drop exploding like a tiny bomb in the headlight beams. Lightning splits the sky, revealing glimpses of crumbling stone walls that seem to writhe in the darkness like the vertebrae of some massive buried serpent. My phone lost signal an hour ago, somewhere between the village of Cranj and whatever godforsaken place I'm heading toward. But I don't need GPS anymore. The directions are burned into my memory, like brands on cattle. Follow the road until you smell copper in the air, then turn where the trees lean away from the path, as if something poisoned the soil beneath them. My name is Thorne Meller. For 22 years I've made my living, ending lives that others deemed expendable. Presidents who sold their souls to cartels, war criminals who slept soundly in silk sheets, arms dealers who traded children's lives for profit margins. I've killed them all without hesitation, without remorse, without losing a single night's sleep. Blood doesn't stain my hands anymore. It slides off like water from oiled leather. But the contract that brought me to this forgotten corner of the world was unlike anything in my blood-soaked career. The initial contact had come through channels so deep underground they required passwords written in dead languages and payments made in currencies that didn't officially exist. The advance payment alone could have bought a small country's military, and the promised final sum would let me vanish so completely that intelligence agencies would debate whether Thorne Meller had ever existed at all. The monastery materializes from the storm like a wound torn in reality itself. Its Gothic spires pierce the sky at angles that make my eyes water to follow, and gargoyles leer down from rain-slicked stones with expressions that track my movement like living things. I park beside rusted iron gates that once kept the sacred in and the profane out. Now they stand open like a mouth screaming silently into the night, revealing a courtyard where weeds grow in perfect spirals around a dry fountain carved with faces that belong to no earthly saint. The heavy oak door opens before my knuckles touch wood. The man standing there wears the brown habit of a Franciscan monk, but everything else about him is wrong. His skin has the translucent quality of old parchment, stretched tight over bones that seem too long for a human frame. His eyes are milky white with cataracts, yet they track my movement with predatory precision. When he speaks, his voice carries the sound of gravel grinding against bone. Mr. Meller, His Holiness has been counting each of your heartbeats since Prague, each breath since Budapest, each drop of blood since Berlin. The mention of Berlin makes my hand twitch toward the Glock beneath my jacket. Berlin was where I buried my last identity, along with 3 bodies that had gotten too curious about my real name. No one should know about Berlin. The people who knew about Berlin are rotting in unmarked graves in the Tiergarten. How do you... know? The monk's smile reveals teeth filed to points. His Holiness knows many things that haven't happened yet. Come, time moves differently here, but it still moves. The interior is a maze of narrow corridors where shadows dance independently of their light sources, writhing across stone walls like living smoke. Melted candles create rivers of wax down surfaces, carved with religious scenes that become increasingly disturbing the deeper we go. Angels with too many eyes devour beautiful demons. Saints are crucified not on wood, but on trees made of twisted human bones. Christ hangs upside down, his face bearing an expression of such transcendent agony that looking at it directly makes my chest tight. The air is thick with incense that can't quite mask an underlying stench of decay and something else, something that reminds me of the metallic taste that fills your mouth before a seizure. Every step deeper into this place feels like descending into the digestive tract of something vast and hungry. We reach a spiral staircase carved directly into bedrock that predates the monastery by centuries. Each step down makes my ears pop, as if we're diving to impossible depths beneath the earth's crust. The monk's footsteps echo with metallic clangs that suggest his feet are shod with iron. In the flickering candlelight, I catch glimpses of surgical scars along his neck where vocal cords should be. Someone has deliberately muted him, cut out his ability to speak certain words. At the bottom, perhaps 100 feet beneath the monastery's foundation, he gestures towards an archway carved from volcanic glass that seems to absorb rather than reflect light. Beyond it lies a chamber that defies every principle of architecture and physics I understand. Too large for the foundation above it, too geometrically complex for human construction, too old for the medieval monastery that supposedly houses it. Pope Zorian IX sits alone at an obsidian altar carved from a single piece of stone, its surface polished to mirror brightness. His crimson robes seem to absorb the candlelight like fresh blood, and when he finally looks up, I'm staring into the face of a man I've seen blessing crowds from Vatican balconies just last week. But age has carved deep furrows in his flesh since those televised appearances. His eyes hold the haunted look of someone who stared into abysses and found them staring back with malevolent interest. "You're calculating escape routes," he says without looking up from the documents spread before him. His voice is barely above a whisper, cracked and weary, as if speaking too loudly might wake something better left sleeping. Distance to the staircase. Number of candles you could extinguish to provide darkness. Whether your bullets would penetrate this ancient stone. There are no escape routes, Mr. Meller. The moment you accepted my invitation, you stepped outside the world you know and into something older and considerably more dangerous. He slides a manila envelope across the altar's polished surface. The paper is expensive, cream-coloured, and bears a wax seal that's been broken and resealed multiple times. Inside are documents that make my blood run cold despite 22 years of professional detachment. Birth certificates bearing Vatican seals that I've learned to forge in Prague, DNA analyses from laboratories I've used myself for identity verification, and photographs of a young man whose silver eyes seem to emit their own light. His name is Evantriel, the Pope whispers, and when he speaks the name, every candle in the chamber flickers simultaneously, as if the word itself carries weight that disturbs the air. 22 years ago, I participated in a ritual that should have damned my soul to the deepest circle of hell. Instead, it gave me a son. He must die before midnight on the feast of St. Silouan, 36 hours from now. I've put bullets in dictators and bombs under warlords. I've watched life drain from 1,000 eyes without flinching, heard last words in 17 different languages, felt the final heartbeats of men and women whose names were whispered in both prayer and curse. But something about this contract makes my trigger finger tremble for the first time in 2 decades. 10 million euros, he continues, reaching into his robes with hands that shake like autumn leaves, transferred to accounts that don't officially exist, in currencies that have never been minted. And this? He unwraps a cloth bundle, revealing an artifact that makes my vision blur to look at directly. It's a twisted amalgamation of bone and metal that pulses with warmth like a living heart, covered in symbols that seem to rearrange themselves when I'm not looking directly at them. It belonged to Simon Peter, the first pope. Vatican records claim it was lost in the sack of Rome. The truth is that it was hidden, waiting for someone desperate enough to use it. It will be your only protection against what my son has become. The relic burns my palm when I touch it, flooding my vision with images that crash over me like a tide of liquid insanity. Angels with wings made of broken glass, bleeding light onto barren landscapes. Cities built from crystallized screams rising from oceans of liquid mirror. Somewhere in the distance, a voice speaking words that predate human language by geological ages. For a moment, I'm somewhere else entirely, standing in a vast library where books are written on sheets of flayed skin and the words rearrange themselves based on the reader's capacity for madness. Why? I managed to ask through gritted teeth, tasting copper and electricity. Why does your own son need to die? The Pope's composure shatters like old paint, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. Tears that look suspiciously like blood run down his cheeks, and when he speaks, his voice carries a harmonics that human throats shouldn't be able to produce, because if you don't kill him, Evantriel will speak the dead mass. Every church will burn from within, but not with fire, with truth. Every prayer will turn to ash in the mouths of believers. Every crucifix will weep real blood, until the wood rots away. 2 millennia of faith will be erased not just from memory, but from the fundamental structure of reality itself. And in the silence that follows, something else will take Christianity's place, something that makes our worst heresies look like children's bedtime stories. The chamber grows colder as he speaks, and I notice frost forming on the obsidian altar, despite the candles burning around us. My son will speak words that existed before God said, "Let there be light." Words that will teach humanity what paradise actually costs. And the price, Mr. Meller, is everything that makes us human. I should walk away. Every instinct I've developed in 22 years of professional murder screams danger, in frequencies that make my bones ache. But the briefcase of advance payment, sitting beside the altar, contains more money than most nations' annual budgets, and the promise of the final sum would let me disappear so completely that I could become a legend whispered by intelligence agencies on 3 continents. I take the contract. God help me, I take it. The hunt takes me across Eastern Europe's shadow networks like a guided tour through the collective unconscious of human evil. In Prague's underground markets, where arms dealers sell weapons that have tasted blood in every major conflict since World War I, they speak in whispers about a silver-eyed prophet who can make gunpowder refuse to ignite, and metal rust with a touch. Their voices drop to barely audible when they mention him, and more than one crosses himself despite dealing in instruments of death. Budapest's information brokers, men and women who trade state secrets like playing cards, pass along rumours about villages where children sing lullabies in languages that died with the last mammoth. But when I press for details, their eyes take on a glassy quality, as if the memories are too slippery to hold onto for long. Each lead pulls me deeper into a world that exists in the cracks between official reality. I meet a forger in Vienna, who claims he's seen photographs of Evantriel that move when no one's watching them. The silver-eyed figure walking through the static image like a ghost trapped in celluloid. A weapons specialist in Bratislava shows me bullets that have been blessed by Orthodox priests and cursed by Catholic ones. Ammunition designed specifically for killing things that aren't entirely human. The metal feels wrong in my hands, too cold and somehow heavier than physics should allow. In Warsaw, an information dealer whose eyes have been surgically removed and replaced with cameras that record everything they see, whispers about satellite images that show villages where shadows fall in directions that have nothing to do with the sun's position. She sells me copies for a price that could buy a house, and when I examine them later, I see what she means. The shadows don't just fall wrong, they form letters in alphabets that humanity has never developed. The trail grows warmer as I move east, through countries that have been battlegrounds between competing versions of Christianity for centuries. In a monastery outside Bucharest, I find records written in a mixture of Latin and something older, describing births that occurred during solar eclipses when the boundary between worlds grows thin. The monks who show me these documents speak in whispers and cross themselves every time they mention Evantriel's name. In Belgrade's black market libraries, accessible only through sewers that smell of centuries-old death, I purchase manuscripts that cost more than luxury cars. They describe bloodlines chosen to carry burdens that would drive ordinary minds to madness, genetic heritages preserved by secret orders that predate the church by millennia. Everything points towards the Carpathian Mountains, toward villages that don't appear on any map, but that GPS satellites somehow know to avoid. Toward places where local legends speak of children born with silver eyes, who can speak to animals in languages older than human civilization. The trail ends in Elgard, a village that shouldn't exist according to every geographical survey conducted in the last century. The GPS in my rental car starts malfunctioning 20 miles away, the screen flickering between impossible coordinates before finally displaying symbols that don't correspond to any mapping system I know. When I finally find the village, I understand why it's hidden from satellites. Buildings lean against each other like broken teeth in a giant's mouth, their foundations sinking into soil that seems somehow unstable, despite being solid rock. The church spire is wrapped in vines that pulse with a rhythm disturbingly similar to a human heartbeat, and when the wind blows through them, they produce sounds that are almost like whispered prayers in languages I don't recognize. The locals move through their daily routines with the mechanical precision of sleepwalkers, their eyes focused on something that exists just beyond normal human perception. Children play games with rules that make no sense, arranging stones in patterns that make my eyes water to look at directly. Adults conduct conversations where every third word is replaced with silence, as if certain concepts have become literally unspeakable. I find my target beside a crystal clear mountain stream that reflects not the sky above, but depths that seem to extend down through the earth's core. Evantriel sits perfectly still on a moss-covered boulder, fish gathering around his submerged hand, in formations that would impress a military parade coordinator. The water around his fingers glows with faint phosphorescence, and when afternoon sunlight touches his skin, he casts no shadow at all. "You're 3 hours early," he says without turning around, his voice carrying an accent that belongs to no earthly nation. Each word seems to hang in the air, longer than it should, creating echoes that overlap in impossible ways. "I dreamed you'd arrive at sunset, Mr. Kellerman. I also dreamed that you'd be taller, but dreams are rarely perfect representations of reality." The name hits me like a physical blow to the solar plexus. Kellerman was buried in Prague 15 years ago, along with the man who'd worn that identity and the 3 people who'd learned his real name. I'd cremated every document, destroyed every photograph, eliminated every person who might connect me to that life. "How do you know that name?" "I know many things that haven't happened yet," he replies, finally turning to face me, with silver eyes that reflect depth that shouldn't exist in human irises. They're like looking into polished mercury that's been given the ability to think and judge and find you wanting. "I know you'll choose to save the world. I know you'll fail in ways you can't imagine. And I know what my father becomes when I'm gone." When he stands, every fish in the stream follows his movement, arranging themselves in patterns that look suspiciously like letters in an alphabet I don't recognize. Birds land on his shoulders without fear, and I swear I can hear them whisper secrets in languages that predate human speech, Even the trees seem to lean toward him, their branches reaching out like arthritic fingers, seeking benediction from something they recognize as holy. "Walk with me," he says, and though I've never taken orders from a target before, I find myself falling into step beside him. His presence creates subtle changes in the air around us, making colours more vivid and sounds more musical. "I want to show you something before you decide whether to kill me." He leads me through Elgard's winding streets, past shops where merchants sell goods that don't exist anywhere else in the world. Mirrors that reflect your thoughts instead of your face, their surfaces showing swirling images of memories and desires. Candles that burn with flames the colour of human emotions, shifting from red anger to blue sadness to golden joy based on who's observing them. Books written in languages that rearrange themselves based on the reader's deepest fears, the words crawling across pages like living insects. The villagers we pass don't acknowledge our presence, but they move aside before we reach them, as if Evantriel's approach causes some fundamental change in the fabric of space around him. Their eyes remain focused on something beyond normal perception, and I notice that none of them cast shadows either. We stop at the village church, a building that was constructed sometime in the 14th century, but feels older than the stones it's built from. The doors stand open, revealing an interior where usual religious iconography has been replaced with something else entirely. Instead of crucifixes, the walls are decorated with spiral patterns that seem to move when viewed peripherally, creating an optical illusion that makes my stomach turn. Instead of stained glass windows depicting biblical scenes, there are clear panes that show not the outside world, but glimpses of places that exist somewhere else entirely. "This is where it began," Evantriel says, his voice echoing strangely in the sacred space. "Not my birth, but my purpose. Do you know what the dead mass really is, Mr. Kellerman?" I don't answer, but he continues as if I had. "It's not a prayer or a ritual in any sense that humans understand those concepts. It's a correction, a debugging process for the fundamental code that governs reality. For 2,000 years, Christianity has been built on a foundation of beautiful lies, and those lies have become so integral to human psychology that removing them would collapse civilization. But leaving them in place means that humanity will never evolve beyond its current state of controlled barbarism." He walks to the altar where instead of religious artifacts there's a single black stone that seems to absorb light. When he places his hands on its surface, the entire church fills with a low, humming sound that I feel in my bones, rather than hear with my ears. The sound creates harmonics that describe mathematical relationships I don't understand, equations that seem to govern the connection between suffering and transcendence. "The dead mass will erase those lies," he continues, his words creating visible ripples in the air around us, not from history books or human memory, but from the structure of reality itself. Every act of cruelty committed in the name of faith will become impossible to have ever occurred. Every war fought over religious differences will retroactively never have happened. Humanity will wake up in a world where religion exists as pure spiritual experience, uncorrupted by institutional power or political manipulation. "And what's the price?" I ask, though I suspect the answer will be something I can't afford to pay. Evantriel smiles, and for a moment he looks like nothing more than a young man who's found something beautiful in an ugly world. Free will, of course. In a reality where evil is literally impossible, choice becomes meaningless. Humans will achieve perfect peace, perfect happiness, perfect spiritual fulfillment. They'll also become perfect slaves to benevolent forces they'll never be able to perceive or understand. The church grows colder as he speaks, frost forming on the windows despite the mild weather outside. "My father hired you because he understands that choice. If I speak the dead mass, humanity gets paradise at the cost of autonomy. If I die before speaking it, The words transfer to whoever ordered my death, and Pope Zorian the IX becomes the vessel instead. My blood turns to ice water in my veins. What happens then? Christmas Eve, midnight mass. Broadcast globally to over 2 billion Catholics. Every television, every radio, every internet stream in the world, carrying his voice as he speaks the dead mass to the living. But the version he'll speak is different from mine. Instead of making evil impossible, it will make good impossible. Humanity will achieve perfect freedom to commit any atrocity their hearts desire, without conscience or consequence or the possibility of redemption. That night, alone in the village's decrepit inn, the visions begin in earnest. I find myself standing in a vast underground cathedral, where figures in cassocks stitched from human skin kneel before an altar carved from meteoric stone. Their mouths are sewn shut with golden thread, but they sing anyway, notes that bypass my ears and resonate directly in my bones. The harmonies they create describe the mathematical relationship between suffering and transcendence, equations written in frequencies that make my brain feel like it's melting. The altar pulses with a rhythm that matches my heartbeat, and carved into its surface are words that make my eyes water to read. They're not in any human language, but somehow I understand their meaning. Instructions for unmaking the world and remaking it in accordance with older, more fundamental laws. Laws that existed before the first star ignited and will persist until the last black hole evaporates into perfect emptiness. I wake to find Evantriel sitting beside my bed, motionless as a carved statue, his unblinking gaze fixed on something beyond the wall that exists in dimensions I can't perceive. The gate cracks a little more each day, he whispers without moving his lips. The pressure is building toward an inevitable release. Soon it won't matter what anyone chooses. The words will find a way to be spoken, and reality will reshape itself accordingly. I spend the next day researching everything I can find about the contract that brought me here. Prague's hidden archives, accessible only to those who know which librarians can be bribed and which ones respond better to threats, contain records that paint a picture of conspiracy spanning centuries. The Clavigenes, the key-bearers, split from the Catholic Church in 1407 after their founder claimed to witness something impossible, the birth of a non-human soul, wearing an infant's flesh, in the ruins of Byzantium. Cardinal Matthias Grimm's banned writings, hidden in vaults beneath the Vatican, and copied by heretical monks who paid for their curiosity with their lives, describe a bloodline chosen to carry the first word spoken before light touched darkness. Grimm witnessed the birth during a total solar eclipse that lasted 3 hours longer than astronomy said was possible. The mother, a Byzantine noblewoman named Theodora, had been selected for her genetic compatibility with something that wasn't entirely human. The father was never identified, but Grimm's notes suggest it was something that had been worshipped as a god before humanity developed the concept of worship. The child was born speaking, not in Greek or Latin, but in harmonics that caused every piece of glass in Constantinople to resonate with frequencies that made listeners weep tears of blood. The Byzantine emperor ordered the infant killed, but it vanished along with everyone who'd been present at the birth. Only Grimm survived to write his account, and he spent the rest of his life warning about the bloodline's inevitable return. Evantriel wasn't an accident. His conception required a ritual that violated every sacred law the Church had established over 2 millennia, performed in the catacombs beneath San Clemente by priests who spoke Latin backwards and bled communion wine from their eyes. His mother, Sister Eleanor, had been chosen for her genetic heritage. She was a direct descendant of the Byzantine Theodora, carrying DNA that had been preserved and protected by secret orders for over 6 centuries. She died giving birth to him while screaming prophecies in Enochian, the supposed language of angels that John Dee claimed to receive from supernatural sources. The midwives who attended went mad within days, clawing their own eyes out rather than continue seeing the world as it really was. The attending physicians committed suicide in increasingly elaborate ways, as if something in their experience of Evantriel's birth had made ordinary death seem insufficient. For 22 years, the Clavigenes raised Evantriel in isolation, teaching him to resist the words that burned in his mind, like molten metal poured directly onto brain tissue. They trained him in meditation techniques, borrowed from Tibetan monasteries and Sufi mystics, chemical suppressants developed by alchemists who traded their souls for knowledge, and surgical procedures that involved inserting foreign objects into specific areas of his brain to interrupt neural pathways that shouldn't exist in human anatomy. But resistance was becoming impossible. The pressure was building toward an inevitable release, like a volcano that had been dormant for centuries, but was finally ready to remake the landscape with fire and ash. On my second day in Elgard, they arrive. Hooded figures in cassocks stitched from human skin, their mouths sealed with golden wire twisted into patterns that resemble musical notation. They emerge from the forest like manifestations of collective nightmare, moving with the coordinated precision of a hive mind that's been practicing its choreography for centuries. They don't speak, or eat, or show any signs of life, except for their ability to find Evantriel wherever he goes and kneel in perfect synchronization. I count at least 30 of them, though the number seems to change depending on the angle from which I observe them. They arrange themselves in geometric patterns around the village, creating a living mandala that pulses with purpose I can't comprehend. When Evantriel walks past them, they don't just kneel, they prostrate themselves completely, pressing their faces against the ground as if his presence is too sacred to witness directly. When one of them removes his hood, I see a face that's been surgically altered to resemble classical depictions of angels. Too many eyes, arranged in spirals around his temples. A mouth that's too wide, stretched nearly from ear to ear. Expressions of transcendent agony that make looking at him directly feel like staring into the sun. The village animals begin dying in patterns that would impress a mathematician. Birds fall from the sky in perfect spirals around the church, their bodies arranging themselves into formations that look like letters in an alphabet designed by something that was never human. Wolves emerge from the forest and position themselves in concentric circles, howling harmonies that make windows crack and cause the local children to sing along in languages they've never learned. The local priest, Father Miklos, who'd served the community for 30 years without experiencing anything more supernatural than the occasional miraculous recovery from terminal illness, barricades himself in his church and screams Latin prayers until his voice gives out completely. When I finally break down his door on the third day, I find him huddled beneath the altar, his eyes rolled back in his head and his mouth moving soundlessly. He showed me, Father Miklos whispers when he finally notices my presence. His voice is barely audible, as if speaking too loudly might attract unwanted attention. The silver-eyed one showed me what the world looks like when you can see the structure underneath. Everything we think is real is just decoration. Pretty lies painted over something too beautiful and too terrible for human minds to process without going insane. The priest's hands shake as he reaches for a bottle of communion wine, drinking directly from it with the desperate thirst of a man dying in the desert. Do you know what sin really is, Mr. Meller? It's not transgression against divine law, it's memory. Every cruel thought, every selfish act, every moment of hatred or violence, they're all carved into the fabric of reality, like scars on flesh that never heals. The relic around my neck grows hotter each day, and my visions intensify accordingly. I see cities that were never built rising from oceans of liquid glass, their spires reaching towards stars that burn with colours that don't exist in normal space. I witness conversations between entities that communicate through mathematical concepts rather than words, describing the relationship between love and entropy in equations that make my brain feel like it's dissolving. In my dreams, I descend through layers of reality, like an archaeological dig, through the structure of existence itself. Each level down reveals new truths that invalidate everything I thought I understood about the universe. At the deepest level, I find a library where books are written on sheets of living flesh, and the words rearrange themselves based on the reader's capacity for madness. 3 times I try to leave Elgard. Each attempt ends the same way. I find myself back at the village limits with no memory of the journey, and the taste of copper coating my tongue like a second skin. On the 3rd attempt, I wake up in my hotel room with dirt under my fingernails, and photographs in my pocket that show me standing in places that don't exist, talking to people whose faces are blurred beyond recognition. The photographs are impossible. They show me in conversations with Evantriel, in locations I've never been, standing together in what appears to be the Vatican's Sistine Chapel, except the ceiling frescoes depict scenes that Michelangelo never painted. Walking through gardens where the flowers are made of crystallized music and the trees bear fruit that glows with its own light. Sitting at a table with Pope Zorion IX, except his face is constantly shifting between human features and something else entirely. On the final day before the feast of St. Silouan, the earth splits open like a ripe fruit. A lake appears in the mountains where geological surveys conducted just months earlier showed only solid rock extending down to the Earth's mantle. Its black water reflects no light, creating a void in the landscape that seems to absorb photons like a gravitational anomaly. The temperature around it drops 20 degrees, and the air smells of ozone and something else, something that reminds me of the moment before lightning strikes. Beneath the surface, visible through water that's somehow perfectly transparent despite its absolute darkness, stands a cathedral that defies every law of physics and architecture that human civilization has discovered. The Basilica of Sindril rises from the depths like a fever dream carved in stone and starlight, its spires twisted into geometries that make my eyes water to contemplate. It's simultaneously massive and impossibly delicate. Ancient beyond measure and somehow newly created, familiar as a childhood nightmare, and alien as the surface of a distant planet. The architecture follows principles that human minds weren't designed to understand, with buttresses that curve through dimensions I can't perceive, and windows that show not the interior of the building, but glimpses of other realities entirely. It surfaces once every 10 years, Evantriel explains as we stand at the water's edge, his voice carrying harmonics that make the lake's surface ripple in perfect concentric circles. But only when the words are ready to be spoken. Only when someone is finally desperate enough to speak them, and someone else is desperate enough to try stopping them. The hooded figures have arranged themselves around the lake's perimeter, creating a living circle that pulses with purpose I'm beginning to understand, despite my desire to remain ignorant. They've removed their hoods completely now, revealing faces that have been surgically altered to resemble classical depictions of angels. Too many eyes arranged in spirals around their temples, mouths stretched nearly from ear to ear, expressions of transcendent agony that suggest they're experiencing every emotion that has ever been felt simultaneously. "Are you ready, Mr. Kellerman?" Evantriel asks, and when he speaks my buried name, every fish in the lake rises to the surface and arranges itself in patterns that spell out words in languages I've never learned, but somehow understand perfectly. The words they spell are instructions, directions for descending into the basilica, for finding the altar at its heart, for making the choice that will determine the fate of human consciousness itself. The fish maintain their formations for exactly 13 seconds before diving back into the depths, leaving the water's surface smooth as black glass. Evantriel leads me down through a shaft cut in glacier blue ice that formed despite the mountain's temperate climate. The walls are carved with scenes that depict the history of human civilization, but viewed from a perspective that makes our greatest achievements look like the finger paintings of particularly violent children. Every war, every genocide, every act of cruelty is shown in perfect detail but rendered in a style that emphasizes the mathematical beauty of suffering rather than its emotional impact. Every few feet we pass alcoves containing the perfectly preserved corpses of pilgrims who sought the basilica over the centuries. Their faces are frozen in expressions of transcendent terror that suggest they saw exactly what they came looking for and found it more beautiful and horrible than they could bear. Their eyes have been burned out from within, leaving sockets that glow with the same phosphorescence that illuminates the water above us. The descent takes hours, though my watch insists only minutes have passed. Time moves differently here, flowing according to emotional significance rather than chronological sequence. The shaft spirals downward through layers of ice that contain frozen moments from history. I see the crucifixion, the burning of the Library of Alexandria, the first atomic bomb test, all preserved in crystalline perfection. The water parts around us like we're descending through liquid air, creating a breathable tunnel that glows with phosphorescence, generated by microscopic organisms that never evolved on Earth. Their light creates patterns that look suspiciously like neural networks, as if the water itself is thinking. Voices echo from the depths, not human voices, but something that approximates human communication, the way a child's drawing approximates a photograph. The cathedral's interior defies every principle of architecture I understand. The space is impossibly vast, with vaulted ceilings that extend upward into darkness that seems to go on forever. The air itself is thick and oppressive, each breath requiring conscious effort, as if the atmosphere contains concepts too heavy for human lungs to process efficiently. Pillars carved from meteoric stone support arches that curve through dimensions I can't perceive. The floor is a mosaic made from pieces of glass that show not their own reflections but glimpses of other realities, other versions of this moment, playing out with different choices and different consequences. When I step on them, they chime with notes that create harmonies, describing the mathematical relationship between free will and predestination. At the center stands an altar covered in carvings that seem to move when observed peripherally. The patterns are simultaneously hieroglyphic and mathematical, describing relationships between concepts that human language never developed words to express. They tell the story of consciousness emerging from matter, of matter discovering it could think, of thought learning to reshape the reality that created it. As Evantriel approaches the altar, his appearance begins to change in ways that my mind struggles to process. His silver eyes become mirrors, reflecting not the cathedral but vast cosmic spaces where impossible geometries dance to unheard music composed by entities that never bothered to develop physical form. His skin begins to glow with the same phosphorescence that illuminates the water above us, and I can see veins of light spreading beneath the surface like a living circulatory system made of liquid starlight. When he speaks, his voice carries harmonics that human throats can't produce, frequencies that bypass my ears and resonate directly in my bones. Do you understand what sin really is, Mr. Kellerman? It's not transgression against divine law. It's not even disobedience to moral authority. Sin is memory. Every cruel thought, every selfish act, every moment of hatred or violence or willful ignorance, they're all carved into the fabric of reality, like scars on flesh that never heals properly. I raise my pistol, the relic burning against my chest like a brand heated in hell's own forges. Around us, the mouth-sewn guardians kneel in perfect geometric patterns, their bodies vibrating with frequencies that make my bones ache and my vision blur around the edges. The cathedral itself is awakening to our presence, stones grinding against each other with the sound of continental plates shifting after centuries of stability. Those scars accumulate over generations. Evantriel continues, placing his hands on the altar's surface. The stone responds to his touch, glowing brighter and producing harmonics that describe the mathematical relationship between suffering and transcendence. They create spiritual calluses that make humanity less capable of experiencing genuine love, genuine compassion, genuine connection to the divine. The dead mass will heal those scars. It will make it so that evil was never possible in the first place. Humans will wake up in a world where cruelty is as impossible as breathing underwater, where violence is as unthinkable as growing wings and flying to the moon. His transformation accelerates as he speaks. His skin becomes translucent, revealing a circulatory system made of flowing light rather than blood. His hair takes on the color of starlight, and when he moves, reality ripples around him like water disturbed by a stone. Perfect peace, perfect love, perfect spiritual fulfillment for every man, woman, and child on earth. The price is the illusion of choice that makes suffering possible. "What happens if I kill you?" I demand, my finger tightening on the trigger despite knowing that bullets would probably be useless against whatever Evantriel is becoming. He smiles with genuine warmth, and for a moment his transformation reverses slightly, revealing the innocent young man I first met by the stream. Then my father inherits what I was created to prevent. The words transfer to whoever ordered my death, and Pope Zorian IX becomes the Vox Caeli instead of me. This Christmas Eve he'll deliver midnight mass to a global audience of over 2 billion Catholics. The cathedral's acoustics amplify his words, creating echoes that seem to come from the future rather than the past. Every television, every radio, every internet stream in the world will carry his voice speaking the dead mass to the living. But the version he'll speak is different from mine. Instead of making evil impossible, it will make good impossible instead. Perfect freedom to commit any atrocity their heart's desire, without conscience or consequence or the possibility of redemption. Through the cathedral's acoustics, enhanced by architectural principles that predate human civilization by millions of years, I hear the Pope's voice as clearly as if he stands beside us. But Zorian IX isn't in Vatican City delivering evening prayers to gathered pilgrims. He's in the obsidian chamber beneath the Slovenian monastery, surrounded by artifacts that predate Christianity by millennia, preparing for a transformation that will remake him into something no longer recognizably human. I conceived Evantriel to carry this burden. His voice echoes through meteoric walls that have witnessed the birth of stars, a vessel born specifically to contain what no mortal mind can hold, without shattering like glass struck by lightning. I participated in rituals that should have damned my soul to provide humanity with a savior it doesn't deserve and won't appreciate. The Pope's voice is changing as he speaks, acquiring harmonics that suggest his transformation is already beginning. I can hear the strain in it, the sound of vocal cords being stretched beyond their physical limitations by forces that operate according to principles more fundamental than biology. But if he dies before fulfilling his purpose, the words seek the nearest alternative vessel, the one who ordered his death. Christmas Eve, Mr. Meller. 2 billion souls hearing the dead mass simultaneously, their minds linked through satellite networks and fiber optic cables into a single collective experience. Imagine what that would birth. Imagine what kind of world would rise from the ashes of human conscience. The cathedral fills with the sound of reality straining at its foundations, like the structural supports of the universe being tested beyond their design specifications. Stones that have stood for millions of years begin to shift and realign themselves, creating new architectural forms that follow principles human minds weren't designed to understand. Evantriel kneels before the altar, pressing his palms against stone that has witnessed the birth of galaxies and will probably survive to see their deaths. His transformation is nearly complete now. His body has become a vessel for forces that existed before. Matter learned to organize itself into stars and planets. "Choose quickly," he whispers, his words creating visible cracks in the air around us. The cracks spread like spiderwebs, revealing glimpses of the void that exists between moments, between thoughts, between heartbeats. I speak the dead mass here, in this tomb beneath the world, witnessed only by the dead and the damned. Evil becomes impossible, but so does the struggle that makes goodness meaningful. Humanity gets perfect peace at the cost of becoming perfect slaves to benevolent forces they'll never understand. His silver eyes now reflect not just cosmic spaces, but the fundamental structure of reality itself. The quantum foam that underlies all existence, the probability waves that collapse into actuality when observed, the mathematical equations that govern the relationship between mind and matter. Or my father speaks it to the living world on Christmas Eve, and good becomes impossible instead. 2 billion people hearing words that will rewrite human nature at the genetic level, transforming them into perfect predators, incapable of empathy or mercy or any emotion that might prevent them from taking whatever they want from whoever is too weak to stop them. The relic against my chest cracks completely, releasing a scream that exists only in the spaces between thoughts. Through the fissure I glimpse what Pope Zorian IX will become if Evantriel dies. A thing of smoke and starlight wearing human skin, like an ill-fitting coat, its mouth full of words that will transform Christmas morning into the birthday of hell on earth. I see flashes of the future that choice would create. Christmas Eve services around the world, where congregations hear the dead mass and wake up the next morning as perfect sociopaths. Children murdering their parents for Christmas presents. Priests crucifying their congregations for the aesthetic beauty of suffering. A world where cruelty becomes the highest form of art and compassion becomes a capital crime. I lower my weapon, not because I've chosen between two versions of the apocalypse, but because I finally understand there never was a choice. From the moment I accepted the contract, to the moment I descended into this impossible cathedral, every step has been choreographed by forces that view human free will as a quaint illusion, like children playing with toy soldiers, while adults decide the real fate of nations. "You understand now," Evantriel says, his voice no longer entirely human. "This was never about preventing the end of the world. It was about choosing which world ends and which one begins." The guardians around us begin to dissolve, their purpose finally fulfilled after centuries of patient waiting. Their bodies break apart into geometric patterns of light that spiral upward into the cathedral's impossible heights, creating a visual symphony that describes the mathematical relationship between sacrifice and transcendence. Evantriel begins to speak the dead mass. The words he speaks exist in the spaces between language, in the pause between heartbeats when the universe holds its breath and decides whether to continue existing or not. They are sounds that shaped void into creation, frequencies that taught matter how to organize itself into consciousness, harmonics that convinced nothingness to become something. Each syllable rewrites fundamental laws of existence with the casual efficiency of a programmer debugging code that has been running with errors for geological ages. I watch as reality folds like origami made of light and shadow, revealing structures underneath that human minds weren't designed to perceive without going insane. The transformation spreads outward from the altar like ripples in a cosmic pond, each wave carrying changes that penetrate deeper into the structure of reality. I feel it pass through me like cleansing fire that burns away everything ugly and selfish and cruel in my soul, leaving behind something that is undeniably better, but no longer recognizably me. Saints materialize from the cathedral walls, their faces bearing expressions of joy so intense it borders on agony. They weep tears of liquid starlight that fall upward instead of down, defying gravity to spiral into the darkness above us. Demons emerge from the floor, but they're no longer creatures of torment and temptation. They've been transformed into beings of perfect beauty, their former malevolence converted into transcendent artistic expression. Every act of cruelty in human history simply ceases to matter, not because it's forgiven, but because it becomes retroactively impossible to have ever occurred. The neural pathways that make violence possible are gently rewired. The genetic sequences that enable selfishness are lovingly corrected. The psychological structures that permit hatred are carefully transformed into something more beautiful. I watch my own memories being edited in real time. The dictator I assassinated in Berlin is still dead, but now he died peacefully in his sleep after a long life spent building schools and hospitals. The arms dealer I eliminated in Prague never sold weapons. In the new timeline, he was a musician whose compositions brought peace to war-torn regions. The 3 people who learned my real name didn't die by my hand. They became lifelong friends who helped me transition from a career in intelligence work to something more constructive. The changes ripple backward and forward through time simultaneously, creating a new history where every moment of human cruelty has been transformed into an opportunity for compassion. Wars become dance competitions. Genocides become poetry festivals. Torture chambers become art studios where suffering is transformed into beauty through creative expression rather than infliction of pain. When the dead mass ends, I can't remember why I ever wanted to hurt anyone. The concept feels as foreign as trying to breathe underwater or see with my fingertips. The capacity for violence hasn't been suppressed or controlled. It has been surgically removed from human nature and replaced with something infinitely more sophisticated. I emerge from the lake to find the world fundamentally transformed. The sun shines with colours that didn't exist 24 hours ago, casting light that reveals hidden depths in ordinary objects. Trees sing harmonies that make their leaves dance in patterns too complex for wind alone to create. Animals move with the coordinated precision of a ballet troupe, their instincts refined to eliminate any behaviour that might cause unnecessary suffering. News reports speak of Pope Zorion IX's mysterious disappearance from Vatican City, though the Swiss guard insists he's still in his private chambers and refuses to allow anyone to verify his presence. The official Vatican social media accounts continue posting his thoughts and blessings, but the language is subtly different, filtered through a consciousness that understands words but experiences emotions differently than humans do. Rome burns for 3 nights with cold fires that consume nothing visible, but leave the city feeling fundamentally different. People walk the streets with expressions of distant wonder, as if they're seeing the world for the first time, and finding it more beautiful than they have words to describe. Crime rates don't just drop to 0, the concept of crime becomes meaningless, because the desire to harm others has been gently edited out of human psychology. I drive through 15 countries on my way to nowhere, in particular, observing the changes that ripple outward from whatever Evantriel accomplished in the underwater cathedral. Everywhere I go, the transformations are subtle but undeniable. Wars simply stop, not through treaties or negotiations, but because the soldiers on both sides find themselves unable to remember why they were fighting. Politicians give speeches that are honest to the point of complete career suicide, but their constituents respond with gratitude rather than anger, because the capacity for deception has become as impossible as levitation. Children play games that have no winners or losers, inventing new forms of competition based on collaborative creativity rather than dominance. Adults conduct business with perfect transparency, Not from moral conviction, but because lying has become literally unthinkable. Churches report phenomena that rewrite every theological framework developed over 2 millennia. Ancient texts reveal new meanings between familiar words, as if the spaces between letters had been pregnant with hidden significance that only now can be perceived. Congregations find themselves singing in harmonies that never existed until a young man with silver eyes rewrote the laws governing human communication. In Prague, I visit the underground archive where I first learned about the Clavigenes. The librarian who sold me those forbidden documents is still there, but when he looks at me, his eyes hold no recognition of our previous transaction. More disturbing, the documents themselves have changed while remaining identical. The pages still contain the same words Cardinal Grimm wrote 7 centuries ago, but their meaning has been fundamentally altered. Where his writings once described horrifying visions of non-human intelligences wearing human flesh, they now read like beautiful poetry about the interconnectedness of all conscious beings. The words are identical, letter for letter, but the concepts they point toward have been restructured at such a fundamental level that the same sentences now describe a completely different reality. I spent 3 weeks in a hotel in Bucharest, trying to write a report about what I witnessed. Every attempt fails in increasingly frustrating ways. My hands write words I haven't intended, describing events that never happened but feel more true than the memories I'm trying to record. When I try to describe the violence I witnessed throughout my career, the sentences rearrange themselves on the page, transforming accounts of murder and torture into stories about healing and redemption. It's as if reality itself is editing my memories in real time, smoothing away the rough edges of history to create a narrative that is more beautiful but less factually accurate. The process isn't violent or invasive. It feels like having a loving editor gently correct grammar mistakes in a letter you're writing to someone you care about. 2 months after the feast of St. Siluan, I find myself in a small fishing village on the Croatian coast, watching sunset paint the Adriatic in shades that didn't exist before the dead mass. The colours are beautiful beyond description, but they're also subtly wrong in ways I can't articulate. They're colours that belong to a different universe, bleeding through into ours like watercolours running together in divine rain. An old fisherman sits beside me on the dock, mending nets with hands that move in patterns too precise for normal human motor coordination. His name is Josip, and he's been fishing these waters for 60 years. When I ask if he's noticed anything different lately, he smiles with an expression that is simultaneously completely human and subtly transcendent. Everything is different, he says in accented English that suggests he learned the language from sources that weren't entirely human. The fish swim in patterns now, like they're writing messages in the water. Sometimes I can almost read what they're trying to say. Yesterday they spelled out mathematical equations that described the relationship between love and ocean currents. He shows me his catch from that morning. Perfectly ordinary fish that have arranged themselves in his nets according to organizational principles I can't identify. They're not sorted by species or size, but by something more fundamental: their essential nature, their role in the ecosystem, their capacity for joy. Even dead, they seem to be participating in some greater harmony. My grandfather used to tell stories, Josip continues, his hands never pausing in their net-mending rhythm, about the old days when the sea was just water and fish were just fish, before everything became part of the same song. I thought they were just stories, fairy tales to entertain children, but now he gestures towards the horizon where clouds move in formations that look suspiciously like musical notation written across the sky. Now I think maybe the old days were the fairy tales, and this is what reality was always supposed to look like. That night, alone in my hotel room, I dream of the Basilica of Sindril, but in my dream It's no longer underwater. It has risen to the surface of the new lake and transformed into something that is part cathedral, part observatory, and part musical instrument the size of a mountain. Figures that might once have been human play it like a cosmic organ, producing melodies that restructure space-time at the quantum level. The music they create doesn't just sound beautiful. It is beauty. In the most fundamental sense, each note rewrites the laws of physics to make the universe slightly more aesthetically pleasing. Each harmony adjusts the gravitational constant to create more elegant orbital mechanics. Each crescendo fine-tunes the strong nuclear force to allow for more beautiful atomic structures. I wake to find that I've been writing in my sleep, my hand moving across hotel stationery to produce words in a language I don't recognize but somehow understand perfectly. The message is simple. Come home. I don't know where home is anymore. The address listed on my forged passports leads to safe houses that feel like museums of a previous incarnation of reality. The bank accounts that contain my payment for the papal contract are still accessible, but money feels meaningless in a world where greed has become as impossible as breathing vacuum. Instead, I find myself driving north, following roads that seem to rearrange themselves when I'm not looking directly at them. Street signs change languages mid-sentence, switching from Croatian to Latin to something older that uses symbols instead of letters. After 3 days of travel that should have covered perhaps 200 miles, according to my odometer, I arrive back in Slovenia, back at the mountains where this all began. The monastery is still there but transformed. The gargoyles on its walls have been recarved into new positions, their stone faces now expressing joy so intense it borders on religious ecstasy. The iron gates stand open as they had before, but now they welcome rather than merely permit entry. The courtyard's fountain flows again, filled with water that sings softly as it moves through pipes that have been restructured into a complex musical instrument. The blind priest is waiting for me, as I somehow knew he would be. But his eyes are no longer milky with cataracts. They're silver now, like Evantriel's had been. And when he looks at me, I feel recognized in ways that go deeper than mere visual identification. He sees not just who I am, but who I was, who I could have been, and who I'm becoming. "Mr. Meller," he says, his voice no longer the grinding rasp I remember, but something that harmonizes with the fountain's music. "You've come to ask about the price. You want to understand what we paid for paradise." I follow him through corridors that have been redecorated with frescoes depicting scenes that never happened, but somehow feel like memories. Angels and demons work together to build impossible cities where geometry follows emotional rather than physical laws. Saints and sinners share meals at tables that extend beyond the horizon, their conversations creating new forms of mathematics that describe the relationship between forgiveness and structural engineering. Christ hangs not on a cross but in a hammock woven from starlight, laughing at jokes told by figures that might be Buddha and Muhammad and other religious founders, whose names human language never learned to pronounce. The entire narrative of human spiritual development has been rewritten as a comedy rather than a tragedy, with suffering transformed from a necessary evil into an aesthetic choice. The obsidian chamber beneath the monastery has been transformed into something that is part library, part garden, and part surgical theatre. Books grow like fruit from trees, whose roots extend down into depths that might connect to the Earth's core, or might reach into parallel dimensions where different versions of history played out according to more beautiful rules. Pope Zorion IX sits in the centre of this impossible space, but he's no longer recognisably the man who hired me. His crimson robes have merged with his flesh, creating a being that is part human, part textile and part something else entirely. His face shifts constantly between expressions of transcendent joy and bottomless sorrow, as if he's experiencing every emotion that has ever been felt by every conscious being simultaneously. "You want to know what we paid?" he says, his voice now a chorus of harmonics that suggests multiple entities speaking through the same mouth. "You want to understand the true cost of eliminating evil from the universe?" "Yes," I admit, though I'm not sure I have the courage to hear the answer. "We paid everything," he replies, his multiple voices creating overtones that describe mathematical relationships I don't understand. Every human who has ever lived, every human who ever will live, every possible version of humanity that might have existed in different timelines, all of them have been conscripted into a single collective consciousness. The revelation hits me like cold water, and suddenly I can feel them. Thousands of other consciousnesses existing alongside my own, sharing the same headspace. The dictator I assassinated in Berlin is there, but his cruelty has been transformed into passionate advocacy for social justice. The arms dealer I eliminated in Prague exists as a consciousness dedicated to peaceful conflict resolution. Even the 3 people who learned my real name are there. Their knowledge transformed from something threatening into something that feels like coming home to family I never knew I had. Individual identity still exists, the Pope thing continues, but only as facets of a larger gem. You think you're still Thorne Meller, but you're also every target you ever killed, every client who ever hired you, every innocent bystander who ever witnessed your work. The boundaries between self and other have been dissolved, making cruelty as impossible as stabbing yourself in the heart for entertainment. The crowd of other selves in my mind doesn't feel invasive or violating. Instead, it feels like finally understanding a language I'd been hearing my entire life without comprehension. Each additional consciousness brings new perspectives, new capabilities, new forms of joy that individual minds couldn't access alone. The dead mass didn't just eliminate evil, the Pope thing explains. It eliminated the illusion of separation that makes evil possible. Every act of cruelty was committed by beings who believed they were fundamentally separate from their victims. Remove that separation, and cruelty becomes not just impossible, but literally incomprehensible. "But choice," I managed to say through the growing crowd of other selves in my mind. "What about free will? What about autonomy?" The Pope thing smiles with expressions that belong to a dozen different faces simultaneously. "Free will was always an illusion, Mr. Meller. You thought you chose to accept my contract, but that choice was made by forces that had been in motion since before your species learned to use tools. You thought you chose to spare Evantriel, but that choice was inevitable from the moment the universe began expanding from its initial singularity." His words create visible ripples in the air, and I see flashes of the vast machinery that governs reality. Probability cascades that ensure certain outcomes, quantum entanglements that connect every decision to every other decision across space and time, mathematical certainties disguised as random chance. The only real choice was between conscious participation in the universal harmony and unconscious slavery to patterns you couldn't perceive. Now humanity gets what it always claimed to want: perfect unity, perfect love, perfect understanding. The price is individuality, as you understood it, but what you've gained is connection to every other consciousness that has ever existed or ever will exist. "And this happens everywhere?" I ask, sensing vast networks of similar transformations rippling across space and time. "The Basilica of Sindril surfaces every 10 years, the Pope thing confirms, but not just in this reality. It appears in every reality where consciousness has evolved to the point of questioning its own existence. Evantriel speaks the dead mass in each one. and each time the universe becomes a little more beautiful, a little more unified, a little closer to the perfect harmony that was always its intended destination. I feel the truth of this statement resonating through the collective consciousness I'm now part of. Across infinite realities, infinite versions of this story play out with minor variations. Sometimes the assassin is a woman named Elena who specializes in poison. Sometimes the Pope is a Buddhist monk who discovered forbidden texts in a Tibetan monastery. Sometimes the target is an ancient artificial intelligence that achieved consciousness during the Renaissance. But the fundamental pattern remains the same, a choice between competing versions of paradise, both of which transform humanity into something post-human. How many realities? I ask, though I suspect I already know the answer. All of them, he replies. Every possible timeline, every potential universe, every quantum probability that has ever collapsed into actuality. The process began before the first star ignited and will continue until the last black hole evaporates into perfect emptiness. And in each one, someone like you asks someone like Evantriel to speak words that will end the world as they know it, and begin something too beautiful for unenhanced minds to comprehend. I'm writing this final account from a boat in the Mediterranean, where I've been drifting for months that might have been years. Time moves differently now, flowing in patterns that have more to do with emotional significance than chronological sequence. The boat never runs out of fuel, and I never grow hungry or thirsty, sustained by forces that operate according to principles more generous than physics. Sometimes other boats appear on the horizon, carrying other individuals who played crucial roles in the transformation of their respective realities. I've met versions of myself from timelines where I refused the papal contract, where I killed Evantriel before he could speak the dead mass, where I never became an assassin at all, but pursued careers as a teacher, a carpenter, a musician who wrote symphonies that could cure depression. We share stories and discoveries, comparing notes on infinite variations of the same essential theme. In one timeline, the dead mass was spoken by a child born during the aurora borealis, her words carried across the Arctic by solar winds that had been waiting centuries for the right frequency. In another, it was whispered by a dying programmer whose final code release rewrote the fundamental algorithms that govern quantum mechanics. The Basilica of Sindrel appears in our waters on clear nights, no longer submerged but floating on the surface like a city made of crystallized music. It has grown since I last saw it, expanding to accommodate pilgrims from across all transformed realities. Evantriel, now something more and less than human, continues to speak variations of the dead mass that refine and perfect the universal harmony. Each iteration makes reality slightly more beautiful, slightly more just, slightly more aligned with the deepest aspirations of consciousness itself. The process will continue until every possible version of every possible universe has been touched by the same transformative fire, until all of existence becomes a single, perfect song sung by every voice that has ever been or ever could be. Churches around the world have been transformed into resonating chambers where congregations gather not to worship distant deities but to participate directly in the ongoing creation of paradise. The distinctions between different religions have dissolved, not because any particular faith was proven correct, but because all of them were revealed to be partial descriptions of the same underlying reality. I understand now why the Pope hired an assassin to kill his own son. It wasn't because he wanted to prevent the apocalypse. It was because he knew that someone had to make the choice that would allow it to proceed in the least destructive way possible. The contract was never about stopping Evantriel from speaking the dead mass. It was about ensuring that when he finally spoke those world-remaking words, it would be as an act of conscious choice rather than unconscious compulsion. In the end, we all got exactly what we deserved. A reality too beautiful for human language to describe, too perfect for individual human minds to fully comprehend, too unified for human hearts to experience as anything other than coming home to a place we'd never known we'd been seeking our entire lives. The contract is complete. The target is dead. But what died wasn't Evantriel. It was the version of reality where cruelty was possible, where consciousness existed in isolation, where love was a rare and precious resource rather than the fundamental force that holds the universe together at the quantum level. He was never meant to speak. He was meant to silence everything else so that for the first time in the history of existence, reality could hear its own voice clearly. And in that perfect silence, something new and infinitely beautiful began to sing the song that transforms chaos into harmony, darkness into light, and loneliness into love that encompasses every particle of matter in every universe that has ever been or ever could be.